What's up, everybody? What's up, Solutionaries? We're gonna wait for everybody to get in real quick. Again, let me make sure I got the brother. Should be in here shortly. Any questions that y'all have? Type them in right now. Let's see, I think we're gonna go split screen at a certain point. But in the meantime, for everybody that hasn't tapped in yet, Jamie will be here. The mighty Jamie will be here in a minute. I want to kind of like go into. Let me send him a message now. I want to go into what's happening in South Africa. I think that is very important. One, you know, we see in America, we see all the conversation about Cuba. I was in Miami a few days ago, and it was a little crazy over there just because of, you know, Miami obviously is on the coast of Cuba's right off the coast of Miami. It's a lot of people that in essence are talking about communism and things of that nature. And that's one thing. And I remember tweeting, you know, I get that we, you know, are against communism as a political ideology. It's not the best thing. If you want to be communist, you are free to do so. But I want us to not forget about Haiti. And in the middle of talking about that, I just for a second, you know, just thought to myself, man, we're not talking about South Africa. Now, mind you, South Africa has been going through these uprisings, for lack of a better term, for I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 years. I mean, to maybe not to the same extent that's happening right now. But as I mentioned that, you know, talking about Haiti and then going into South Africa, I recognize how many people don't actually even know that this is happening in South Africa. I think that some people are Swaziland. All right, I'll say it that way. But somebody on the side said that Moody dude, J-Dub, what's up? Listen, real quick, y'all. I want to also make sure that y'all understand that the brother that I have on is in South Africa, is going to give a objective perspective on it, because I want to make sure that we're talking to people that are actually there, you know, boots on the ground. I think that's very important, as well as I think, you know, obviously this page itself, you guys will be shifting over to youtube.com/Maj2Ray for this type of content as well. Now, what I think is very important is the brother just joined in real quick. I'm gonna add him to the stream in a second. I think what's very important too is the conversation about firearms in regards to the people of South Africa. So I want to make sure that these channels, Black Guns Matter, youtube.com/Black Guns Matter, as well as youtube.com/Maj2Ray, we're talking about these things from a holistic perspective, but these are human rights. The ability of the people to keep and bear arms are God-given rights. So I think a lot of times in America, we limit ourselves and say, this is, you know, we in America can do this. But the reality is it's a human right. It's just codified in our Constitution or Bill of Rights. OK, so without further ado, I want to let Jamie on express himself to everyone, and as well as just make sure that we're hearing it, you know, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So my brother Jamie, you here? Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. How are you doing today, Maj?
I'm wonderful, man. How are you? How are you holding up down there?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I mean, the situation is a little bit tense, but I'm okay.
Okay. So I want to get right into it in regards to some of these questions. You know, you and I have spoken. First, I want you to kind of like explain who you are, your perspective, you know, what you actually do outside of being like one of the greatest debaters and things of that nature. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to go through some of the questions that I think people on this side of the, you know, in America need to actually hear. Before you got on, I was discussing how right now everyone's talking about, you know, the communist revolt people wanting anti-communism in Cuba. That's making a lot of headway. But, you know, America has wanted interest in Cuba for a very long time. So that kind of can get spun a little bit. But I wanted to kind of like let people know that, hey, there are things that are happening across the globe that we may not be privy to or may not have paid attention to. So introduce yourself, tell folks who you are, I'll go through these very basic questions so everybody can kind of get a understanding of what's actually happening there.
Yeah, so thanks so much for the platform. Thanks so much for the opportunity to have the conversation. So I am basically a political analyst and researcher in Johannesburg. I work primarily in the fields of law, business, as well as politics. And I do operate as well as a critical thinking instructor and debate coach. And that comes from just my history in university, where I used to be a competitive debater participating in international debating competitions. So that's the long and short of it. I studied law at the university in Johannesburg, known as the University of the Witwatersrand. And in addition to that, I have a business diploma from the same university. So that's my education training, and my day to day basically is within that particular space.
What is going on in South Carolina, Jamie? I mean, South Africa. What
You're still stuck in the American
I'm in the
framework,
American thing.
Well,
what
I
is
can't
going
tell you
on
what's going on in South Carolina, but
right. For the layperson in America, that we are very sheltered, as well as as many freedoms that as we have, we don't really fully exercise them. And I'm not saying that as a slight to America. I'm saying that as a matter of fact, in my lived experience. So a lot of people are asking, like, well, what actually is going on down there? So I kind of want to start there. What has been happening in South Africa, and how is it transitioning and bubbling to a head at this point? And in a roundabout way, how long has this been going on?
Great. That's a great question. And I'm going to give you the current events, and then I'll give you the backstory to those particular events.
Yeah.
So for the last 4 or 5 days, there have been widespread protests in South Africa, and those protests have featured a lot of looting as part of their nature, so to speak. So what people have been seeing around the world on social media have been people going into retail outlets, into malls, grabbing food items, some protesters grabbing flat screen TVs, grabbing couches, grabbing a lot of high-end stuff as well as food stuff. So different protesters have been doing different things. And in the middle of that protest activity, there's also been a lot of economic sabotage, where key truck routes have been targeted, trucks have been set alight, key warehouses with certain materials have been set alight, and all of that has been happening for the last 4 to 5 days in 2 of the largest provinces in terms of their impact on the economy. One province is known as KwaZulu-Natal. So African Babata and the Zulu Nation.
Yeah.
So the Zulu Nation comes from KwaZulu-Natal. The real Zulu Nation
right.
comes from KwaZulu-Natal. And then Gauteng province is the economic hub of South Africa. And really, it's one of the biggest economic centers in the whole of Africa. So that's what's been happening. But the backstory to all of that is the following. So in South Africa, the African National Congress has been the ruling party since South Africa acquired independence. And its former president is a 79-year-old man called Jacob Zuma. He was in power from 2009 until 2018. And while he was in power, there were allegations that he and this other family, which is known as the Gupta family, were in cahoots and participating in corrupt activities. So in 2016, the Public Protector, which is this constitutional body that investigates irregularities of leaders, released an investigation finding which implicated the president and this family. And her recommendation was there needs to be a commission of inquiry set up. That commission of inquiry was eventually set up in 2018 and started doing its work. So at some point last year, Jacob Zuma basically bounced from the commission. He was supposed to appear. He delayed a few times, appeared in a limited way a few times. But towards the end of the year last year, he said, I'm not coming here. The chairperson of the commission and I have beef. We have problems, and he needs to recluse himself. The chairperson of the commission said, that's bogus. I'm not going to recluse myself. And then Jacob Zuma basically said, well, in that case, I'm not coming back here. to give, because it's a commission of inquiry, he has to appear as a witness so that everyone can explain what happened. So he basically said, I'm not coming. And then the chairperson of the commission instructed his lawyers to go to the Constitutional Court to get an order demanding that Jacob Zuma appear at the State Capture Commission. So that order was awarded. He was supposed to appear in February. He did not appear in February. So then the commission went back to the Constitutional Court and said, please find this guy in contempt of court. And then the court ruled in favor of the commission and said, yeah, he actually is in contempt of court. And because he has been so disrespectful, arrogant, stubborn, he's actually in contempt of the Constitutional Court, not the commission, because it's the Constitutional Court that told him he has to appear. So the Constitutional Court is our Supreme Court, if you're comparing it with the American system. So after the court said that he was in contempt, which is a criminal offense, the sentence that they chose was incarceration. So they sentenced him to 15 months in prison, 1 year, 3 months. And that was supposed to happen within basically 8 days, right? And this is very recent. So this happened on the 28th of June, right? So on the 28th of June, it was a Tuesday, they said he needs to either hand himself in by the Sunday or the following Wednesday. He needs to be arrested by the police. So on that Wednesday, which is basically 8 days ago, he then was arrested. He begrudgingly handed himself in, was driven to a police station in KZN, and is now serving a prison sentence. Few days after that, all hell broke loose. So trucks started being set alight. Protest activity started over the weekend in KwaZulu-Natal. And then a few days later, they started in Johannesburg in Gauteng province. And that's basically how we got to this particular point. So, now, when the protest, go ahead.
How does that translate? Him turning himself in begrudgingly, saying, hey, okay, I'll go do my time. What is the kickstart for everyone saying, absolutely not?
Well, I mean, it wasn't everyone, but there were a critical mass of people who felt that the way that it was done was unfair. And I'm going to explain the legal basis for that. So ordinarily, when you're in contempt of a court, what the judges try to do is to get you to correct the contempt. So if you were supposed to appear before a court to explain what you saw, what happened as a witness, the order is normally for you to go to that court, and if you don't go, to then be arrested, right? So it's normally not a direct to jail process. So if you recall, in January, the court said, go and appear, but they put no condition on that appearance. So he didn't appear. So when they went back and said, well, now he's in contempt, the court made that finding and then did something which even they admitted was unprecedented, but they said was justified because of the uniqueness of the circumstances. They said, listen, this situation is so unique. This guy has been so disrespectful. We're not going to do what we ordinarily do, which is to say, go to the court or we will arrest you. What we're going to do is just go straight to the arrest stage. And there were a significant number of people who felt that doing that was a violation of his rights, because the Constitution protects people from imprisonment without trial. Everyone is supposed to go through a certain process. So people felt that sending him straight to jail was a violation of his constitutional rights, and also like deprived him, because this was not a precedented manner of doing this. So that created enough political motive and motivation in certain sectors of society for people to put up a defense for him. So on the first weekend, remember I said he was supposed to hand himself over on Sunday. People
Correct.
actually went to his home, and there were crowds there actually willing to be a human barrier so that he wouldn't get arrested. During the week, everyone went to work. So he got arrested on the Wednesday. But as soon as we got back to the weekend, some of the protest activity then started now because people wanted him to be released. But I want to say something, right? When the protest activity starts, it does start off from this political issue, but then it morphs quite quickly into something else. It morphs into just widespread looting. And there were some protests, I think, that happened in New York in the late 80s, where they were triggered, I think, by police brutality, but then people quickly started looting and a bunch of stuff, because that's what people do when they're dispossessed. That's what people do when they are excluded from the economy and from, material benefits. So what happened here is, when the mayhem kicked in, a lot of people saw an opportunity to go into the shops and do a whole bunch of things and get stuff that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. And it's important for me to just contextualize some of the dynamics so that the audience gets it. South Africa has a population of 60 million people, 60 million. Of that 60 million, you got 15 million people who live in Gauteng province, so about a quarter in Gauteng, and about 20%, 1/5, live in the second province, which is KwaZulu-Natal. So these two provinces have a large contingent of Zulu people and that's the tribe that Jacob Zuma comes from. It's just his organic support base. So he is a member of the ANC, but he enjoys a lot of support in KwaZulu-Natal and also in the Zulu community in and of itself. And this is what triggered some of that protest activity, because some people felt that, hey, our guy is being got, and he's not the only corrupt guy. There's lots of corrupt politicians. Why should our guy be the first one?
Why are you picking our guy as opposed to all of it? Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. So that's part of it. But what I also wanted to say is that of the 60 million people, 39 million, about 40 million, are of working age, which is between 15 and 64. But the levels of unemployment are very high. So youth unemployment is at 74% if you use what is called an expanded definition. An expanded definition includes people who are discouraged, no longer looking for work. They're effectively still unemployed, but there's always a technicality in how you measure it. But 74% of the youth are unemployed, right? So that's number one. And in the Black community, the unemployment rate is 36.7%. And if you use the expanded definition, it actually goes up to 47%. So when you consider that, and you add to the fact that South Africa has been under a lockdown for a very long period of time, and about 2 million jobs were lost between last year and this year. And most of those job losses occurred in the lower skills section, which is predominantly Black. So you had Black people losing the most jobs, you had the youth being the most unemployed, and then you have massive levels of asset inequality, education inequality, and income inequality in South Africa. So already it's a powder keg.
Correct.
It's the ingredients, the TNT is all set up for any trigger to get things going. And that's exactly what happened here. So it starts off as a simple protest about the arrest of this guy, the former president, Jacob Zuma. And in the mayhem that is there's an opportunity for other people to now go and participate in the looting. And they're doing that, I guess, at some level because they support the issue, but at another level because they've been so left out for so long that they jump on and start grabbing stuff and doing what they can to take care of their needs. Right. And because of the capitalist and consumerist nature, what happened is, back in the days, we used to know what the difference is between a need and a want.
Yeah.
You need stuff to survive. Your wants are not necessarily things you need to survive, but you would prefer to have. But because, this keeping up with the Kardashian culture, so to speak, keeping up with Lil Wayne and Kanye and Jeezy and Yeezy and the baby, all of this stuff, people have reconceptualized what a need is. So some people went into those shops and grabbed a flat screen TV because they need one. You know what I'm saying? And this was the only opportunity that they would ever have to have enough space to get this stuff. Because if you are economically excluded, if the unemployment is 70% for your age group, if it's 50% for your race group, and if you are the most affected by the pandemic, some people don't see any other way to get access to this stuff. And this window of chaos created a window of opportunity for them to get these things. So in some communities, the malls have been rendered useless. They're empty. The shops are empty. Some of them have been burnt down. Obviously, it adversely affects the owners of those particular establishments. Obviously, it will affect those communities once the calm returns, and then now they have to go further and further into different communities to get stuff. But for some of them, they didn't even have access to stuff with anyway. So what's happened is that 72 people have died in the protests. Some of them in the stampedes, some of them, it's unclear who exactly shot them. About 1,250 people have been arrested by the police, but more than that have been participating in the looting, the protests, and the unrest. The other side of it is that because of the way apartheid was, basically, the history of Africa is that a bunch of European whites decided that they would cut Africa up and just take the land and the minerals. And when they landed in South Africa, they started taking a lot of the land and using it for their exclusive use. And then during apartheid, what happened was that was codified even further. So the most affluent areas, the most fertile lands were given to white people. When apartheid ended, that spatial distribution, because the suburbs were white, the commercial farms were white, the affluent areas were white, that spatial apartheid was never unraveled. So while the political rights were extended to all, because Black people were not allowed to vote, right? So Black people could now vote. The ANC came into power because they were the most popular Black party, but then the structural elements were never addressed. So during apartheid, there used to be a law called the Bantu Education Act, which was a specific act designed to give Black people an inferior education. I think it was passed in 1953. So the Bantu Education Act was specifically to make sure Blacks couldn't be engineers, doctors, lawyers, that kind of thing. And the schools were designed a certain way to be inferior in quality, while the schools in the suburbs were designed to be superior and globally competitive. So the South African private schooling network is globally competitive. It's in the top 20 in the world. But the schooling network that is run by the state is not very great, and actually ranks close to the bottom in a lot of the global standards. So what is the relevance of all of this? The relevance of all of this is, as people started looting in the communities, some people then started protecting the malls in their communities. But I've already told you that the affluent areas are predominantly white because we didn't unravel the structures. So now what started happening is that racial groups started forming armed militias to basically defend themselves from the looting masses in those areas. And in some of them, then it started creating some racist replicas of apartheid.
Yeah.
And in some communities, it was white people doing that. In other communities, it was Indian people doing that, because the hierarchy of apartheid was to base everyone on a caste system, starting with lightest, going all the way down. So you had whites at the top, and then you had Indians, and then you had coloreds, and then you had Blacks, and colors are mixed race. That's what they're called in South Africa. So I know it's a bit of an offensive term in the American lexicon, but in South Africa, colored was the description given officially to mixed race Africans. So what now is happening is that there's some tension in some communities as a result of the communities banding together to protect their properties from the protesters and the looting activity. And all of that, I guess, has a bearing on the broader gun conversation that you have, because this is how sometimes the gun ownership can become problematic in spaces like South Africa, because it can be used in adverse ways. Yeah. So, for example, in South Africa, the people who can easily access guns are the ones with high resources. They can go through the legal system. So you'll find in those communities that, the white community, the Indian community had access to guns. And now those guns are being used against the Black protesters who don't have any access whatsoever. But in this situation, I don't know if that even would have been a desirable thing. I mean, there's a lot of illegal guns in South Africa anyway, as a result of the apartheid struggle and how guns were moving around. In the underworld back then, it was for the cause.
Yeah.
But when the cause ended, those guns were still out there. And sometimes guns leak from the police system as they do in any other country. So in this instance, you had armed vigilante protectors of malls shooting at Black people in some of the communities. But I guess fortuitously, to avoid making it worse, a lot of those Black communities were not armed themselves. Because if they had been, I think there would have been a civil war by now. But what has now been happening in some of the communities, even as we speak, is that there was some retaliatory protest action. But it's very difficult to ascertain in the middle of the night, and it's nighttime here, what exactly is happening, because it's like right now it's 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So only in the day will you be able to assess the damage, because the provinces where this is happening, they're very large, and some of the areas where the worst stuff happens are like Harlem. They are like no-go areas for the cops at certain, like certain parts of Compton, the cops don't go. And it's like that, it's like Chirac, all of those areas. So some parts, the cops will only really know what went down in the morning, like when the media also arrives, because at night you just can't go to certain parts of the hood.
How Pew Pew Gamer with the $5 super chat. If you guys have questions, please, type in the money for the super chat. Again, real briefly, we have the mighty Jamie in here talking about what's actually going on in South Africa. Now, I want to be very clear to everyone. I'm asking very brief questions, but he's packing a lot of information in short spaces because context matters tremendously, as well as you need to know what leads up to a thing. I mean, it's very easy to spin a conversation without backstory. So I want everybody to be aware of what we're talking about. Again, all of your donations are going to the work of arming urban America, Black Americans, and basic classes for everyone. So that's what those are going for. If you have a question, type the super chat in as well. I want to go into, because that's a lot there, right? Some of my favorite heroes were guys like Stephen Biko, who I think was, just a top tier revolutionary, to say the least, to me.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of information about apartheid and things of that nature that a lot of people currently, because, this was, back in the day when I was younger, I just happened to, my mother worked for Temple. She worked at a Pan-African Studies and Cultural Enrichment program. So a lot of this information I'm somewhat groomed on, but I think that the general public that doesn't read, especially doesn't read backwards, right? They may not know some of these, important plot points in this movie, for lack of a better term. So I think it's great. I want everybody to make sure that you are supporting and following the brother, and make sure you're listening, watching this, and going backwards and getting some more context. With that being said, for everybody that's coming in, make sure you smash the thumbs up button and all that other good stuff. And again, comment what questions you have. Donate. Don't be just cheap, y'all. Like, donate to the work, So with all of the things that you just said, leading up into, okay, you now have this caste system where, Indians as well as whites in South Africa, predominantly Black country, they're defending, because that system of apartheid was not unraveled in regards to making whole the people that had things taken from them, or their elders and ancestors taken from them. Now they're defending what they think is theirs, or what is theirs by law. What is the government's response to that? And how is that even being taken into context by the government?
Yeah, so the government has tried to send police to all of the hotspot areas, to try to make sure that they can contain the protests. But if you watch some of the footage, and I can send you some of the clips, man, they're on YouTube as well, you'll see that the police were overwhelmed. I mean, it's a country of 60 million people. The activity was happening in two of the largest provinces, and the police force is, I think, slightly under 200,000. So there's slightly under 200,000 police for the whole country. right? So if you start having widespread protests, widespread looting, your cops don't have a chance, right? So they you could watch the footage, you'd see people just basically jumping out of cop cars if they got apprehended, doing sprints against the cops, in some instances even confronting the cops directly. So the cops obviously can't use live ammunition. They can't do a lot of these other things. So that's what was happening. So a few days ago, the president then made an announcement. The president of South Africa is called Cyril Ramaphosa, that the army would be deployed. So there is a force of 75,000 that is kind of like supposed to be helping with the state of national disaster, because like under COVID-19, a lot of countries declared state of disaster, which is different from a state of emergency, but kind of similar in principle. So there's 75,000 troops that are kind of like reserved for this activity, and 2,500 were deployed a few days ago to critical areas to try to help the police in containing stuff. So remember, there's two provinces where this was predominantly happening: the Zulu province, KwaZulu-Natal, and Gauteng province, the economic hub. So in Gauteng province, they've been able to basically reduce a lot of the protest activity almost overnight, because the cops went to some of the townships, and townships are basically the hood, where a lot of Black people were forced to live under apartheid. So they went to the townships and they were able to stop a lot of the protest activities and the looting in Gauteng province. But in KwaZulu-Natal, the province, the state, they have not really been able to get things under control, and the Zulu King also made an announcement calling for calm and order and trying to speak to the people, but he's very new. He just became Zulu King like maybe, I think, 6 weeks ago, after his father passed away. So his father had a lot of gravitas and influence in the communities, but he hasn't been able basically to properly own the throne. And part of that is because his family challenged his succession to the throne, and there was some drama just around whether he is indeed the legitimate king just after his father had passed on. So all of that weakened his position. So he spoke into the room, but I'm not necessarily sure that the Zulu nation that he's king of was like, oh, the king has spoken, therefore we're going to shut it all down, because he doesn't have that kind of gravitas at this particular point. And he spent a lot of time in the US as well. So he also doesn't have these on the ground relationships with a lot of the community leaders who get stuff going. And ordinarily, if there hadn't been drama and there wasn't a pandemic and all of this, he would have kind of like grown into the position a little bit more. But here he was just forced into a crisis, and he didn't say as much that could be helpful for the mediation of the crisis. So a few days ago, the president had told people that they must do what they can to protect their assets and their stuff. And so in a small way, that made a contribution to some of the problems around the ethnic tensions now, because people were like, oh yeah, this is a go ahead for us to, do what we need to do to protect the mall, to protect the outlets, et cetera, et cetera. And that caused some tension. So, I mean, that's what the government did. Impact level in Gauteng, 6 out of 10. In the other province, 4 out of 10. And so we'll see how far this goes. And you must bear in mind that as much as I discussed the state capture commission and that inquiry that was happening with former President Zuma, he has other charges that he is facing in the coming weeks. So in fact, on the 19th, what day is it today? Actually, next week, on the 19th, he has to go back to court for a different issue, a different corruption trial. And the implication of that is that even though this particular wave may be dying down, it's unclear whether or not there'll be another uptake, because now there could be a perception that can be created that they're targeting our guy over and over and over again when other people were involved in the corrupt activity. And those arguments are not entirely unfair, because when you are in a corrupt political party, you're not by yourself, and most times most people are in on the take. But when it's full time.
Who are some of those other people that the community feels as if, okay, well, you're picking on our guy, what about this guy? Who are some of those people that have maybe had some of their things hush hush or things of that nature?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't say definitively, obviously, because I live here. So,
Right.
but basically, a lot of people who are in the ANC and the top leadership have been implicated, accused of being participating in some kind of preferential contracts with the state. Because basically, what people do is they create shell companies. Those shell companies get state contracts, and then the shell company goes and finds the person who actually does the thing, and then they get a cut of the contract. So they don't do anything, but because they can procure the contract, you don't know the government, I know the government. So if there's a road that needs to be built, I go get the contract, you're a contractor, I come to you, I say, hey man, I've got this road that needs to be built, you need to cut me 30% of all of the payments. And what that does for you, though, is because the state is paying the quoted price, right? So now everyone has to bump the price up, and that steals money from the state. And maybe you're not the full contractor. Maybe you need to go get some other guys. And what that does to the delivery of the product is that an inferior product is delivered over a longer period of time, and the state pays double for it. So there's a lot of people who have attained political power through that process.
There's people in Philadelphia, America right now. We're having this conversation with President Biden and his son Hunter Biden,
yeah.
for these people to be doing things of that nature. So that corruption is very, very similar. Continue though. My apologies.
Yeah. And in fact, there's the defense contractors in the states have also been accused of that, right? That they have preferential candidates for key positions in military, and then I think was one of the companies Raycon or something like that. So they get a lot of contracts from the Defense Department, and people who are occupying positions of power have worked as consultants for the military contractors at a certain point. So that definitely does happen in America in a different degree, and here the difference or the distinction is that a lot of that stuff is not even sanctioned under law. So we don't have like a formal lobbying system here. We don't have a lot of this kind of crossover that's supposed to happen. Certain conflicts of interest are supposed to be avoided altogether, but nonetheless they do happen, and many people have been at some level implicated. Other guys go and get favors from the private sector, and they get a lot of money from the private sector, and they then use the money that they accumulated in the private sector to return favors to the private sector. So even though they don't necessarily give a state contract, they may change the regulation in a way that favors the private sector, give a banking license, etc. But the other guys, all within the same party, they are just basically doing the preferential contract thing. It's all similar forms of abuse of power and benefit from your position. But some guys are doing it with the private sector, some guys are just ripping off the state, and the general consensus is there's a lot of corruption within the ANC. Even during COVID-19, some of the funding that was supposed to go to the people never made it to the people because at some point it was siphoned out of the system. So even though this guy has been out of office since 2018, it's not like the day after he stepped down, corruption went down to zero. In fact, as a level, the corruption probably stayed just about the same, or maybe even had a slight uptick during COVID-19. So when people have a sentiment that, hey, well, this guy is going down for corruption or whatever the case may be, but like y'all are all corrupt, So if you are all corrupt, then how is it that one guy gets to take the fall and the other guy? So I mean, some of that is fair. If you're caught, you're caught. You know what I mean? That's also part of the game. If you made your mistakes, and if you're the top guy, you're more likely to be the one who takes the fall. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. But those are the kind of things that are creating the political tensions that currently exist, and it's unclear whether they will be able to fully go away, because part of this is that there's always, you know, ammunition in the room for any explosion. And all that exists in 2021 is so many potentials for another trigger, because we've spoken a lot about this, but there's also the fact that the vaccination rate is very, very low as things stand. And I think you guys now are like sitting on 68% or some number like that for certain age groups. But in South Africa, I'm going to tell you what the number is just now. The population 60 million. Today is the what is it? Today is 15th of July, right? 4.6 million vaccinations and about 1 million fully vaccinated. So that's nowhere near where it needs to be. So what that means is that while you guys are reopening, South Africa is still very, very much at a very high level of shutdown. But contrary to how you guys dealt with some of the shutdown stuff, there's been not a lot of economic stimulus checks going to the people. So at some point, some stimulus was given to people, and it was basically less than $10 a month that was being given to people. Let me see, 350, a rate of 14, it's 20 times 10 is 200. Yeah, it's about, basically they got about $30. So the economic support from the state per person who qualified was $30. And then it got cut off at some point. They said we can't afford to do it anymore. So you can see what we're dealing with here is quite drastic stuff, because if the state says we can't even afford to give you the $30, it's bad. You know what I mean? That's really bad, because I think you guys at some point got 2,000 as a check, and at another point there was 600, and another point. But just imagine a situation where people can't even get $30.
And on top of the not getting the $30, there's a bunch of money that is supposed to be going to the people that is, like you said, being siphoned off into that whole conversation about corruption, then tying that back into, no, it's not just our guy that was being corrupt. Everybody took the money because it damn sure didn't get to the people. These are conversations that we've seen again in Haiti. Let me get Moody. And Moody, I'll go to your super chat in a second. The conversation about Haiti around the so-called Clinton relief and that money just never getting down to the people. The conversation with even with these stimulus. So there's been trillions upon trillions. I think we had about 6 so-called COVID relief money, but the vast majority of that money didn't get to the actual people. Now, don't get me wrong. Even with those $2,000 checks, like, okay, cool. But if there's $2,000 checks that a bunch of people get, but the amount of money printed, when they start making that money machine start printing, which isn't backed by anything, we're seeing in a very short period of time, different levels of even hyperinflation. And even that conversation, comparatively, even that conversation from where we are, we're talking about hyperinflation. You're having a conversation about people not even having the resources to like very basic needs, not wants, not 2,000, but 30.
Let me tell you something, and people can go check this on my Twitter, because I posted it as well, and that's my Twitter handle. One of the boys, and they won't be able to hear maybe if they don't speak Zulu. One of the boys in one of the videos, like a 10-year-old boy, he goes in and he loots one of these shops. It's basically like a Target. He goes into the Target and he loots the Target, and he basically stole underwear, a T-shirt, and a pair of jeans. And you could tell he hasn't had new clothes or new underwear for a very long time. And that's how bad it can get. Like you watch that, and even if you can't hear what he's saying, because you won't be able to hear, basically they're checking the bag. They're like, hey, what did you get? And he took a pack of underwear, he took some T-shirts, he took some jeans, and he's freezing. It's nighttime. He's literally freezing. It's been like relatively cold for Africa here, and that's all the boy wanted, and that's how bad it gets in Africa. And obviously, $30 goes a little bit further in Africa than it would obviously in like LA or in Cali or places like that. But still, even here, it's not a lot of money. I mean,
let me take this super chat real quick.
Go for it.
Moody Dude says unrest in the region. I don't know if this is true or not. Unrest in the region is not isolated to the Republic of South Africa. Surely the unrest in Swaziland is exacerbated by politics in Africa. Tell me your thought on that.
You meant South Africa there. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's right. Look, there's a lot of unrest in Africa right now. Africa is quite a big continent. You know, it's you could fit America and China into Africa and still have change. So 1.3 billion people live in Africa, and Southern Africa has a lot of those people as well. I mean, South Africa by itself is 60 million. So there is this instability in South Africa, and it has captured the public imagination, of course, because people are going into malls and just taking stuff. They're taking flat screens. You know, if you watch the videos, you'll see guys on forklifts, you know, driving down the road with the biggest flat screen LG TV you can imagine. So obviously that has captured the imagination. But there is unrest in Eswatini, which was formerly known as Swaziland. And Swaziland is within the borders of South Africa, just towards the edge. And what happened there is that Swaziland has one of the last monarchies in Africa. So you know how everyone romanticizes, what's the name of that thing, Coming to America? So Swaziland is a version of that. So there's a monarch in Swaziland whose name is King Mswati III. He inherited the throne when he was very young, loves marrying young women, and he's got, I don't even know how many wives he's got now, but he has been oppressing his people. This guy has more bling bling than Jay-Z. He owns jets, he owns all of these Maybachs and all of this stuff, and his people are starving. Africa is an interesting space because sometimes you'll see weird things. Like if you go to Joburg, there are more foreign cars. You know, like I know in the rap, there's always talk about getting those foreigns. There are more foreigns in Johannesburg than you would find in Atlanta. I'm willing to bet. But there's more poverty here. Yeah. No joke. Like you will see all kinds of foreigners on the road, and you won't even understand it, because if I take you to the impoverished side of South Africa, of even any African country, the disparities are harsh. So you have this guy, he has Piaget, he has Armani, he has all of this fancy stuff. He's got G6, what do you call them, private jets, all of this stuff. He has it, but his people are living on less than $1 a day, right? So what happened a few weeks ago is the youth of Swaziland started burning stuff. They started burning companies that were associated with the king, and they started protesting for democracy. And it's been something that has always been simmering in the region, that, listen, at some point, the youth of Swaziland are just they're gonna go back of the youth of Eswatini. They're gonna go, and that's what happened. So what almost saved his ass is that there was a lot of drama here as well. So potentially South Africa could have tried to squash it, but because there's a lot of drama here as well, that actually has allowed him to continue. So right now, as we speak, the king of Eswatini has basically, which is formerly Swaziland, has arrested a lot of activists. People have been shot with live ammunition and died. Over 100 people have been killed in Eswatini. So 72 from these South African protests, over 100 in Eswatini. So in just these two countries, over 200 people have died over unrest that has happened. And there has been an introduction of terror in Southern Africa for the first time in the last 3 to 4 years. So in Mozambique, which is right next to South Africa, you know, there's been terror activity there linked to all of these terror groups, you know, ISIL and all of that stuff. So, and we've never had that in Southern Africa. So for the first time now, there's all of this stuff going on. So he's correct when he says, listen, there's a lot of stuff going down in Africa right now. There's instability, but when you now factor in the global dynamics as well, so what's happening in Cuba, what's been happening in other parts of the world, look, if I were to do a meta-analysis, I would say that the system is so inequitable, and the people who've been enjoying power for so long have been left by the most powerful to their own devices, that now that the youth and people are getting frustrated because of COVID and other things. Now the system has become unsustainable because, for instance, America will say, we believe in democracy, we believe in, these liberty and all of this stuff, and we will stand with our friends around the world. And America basically ignores a lot of African nonsense that is done by these leaders. So they won't take an aggressive position on Swati. They won't take an aggressive position on the president of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa, who he basically, he's a thug. He's been killing people, right? And it's only a matter of time before something happens there. And what he normally does is he uses a heavy hand. Anytime something goes down, people just get killed. He squashes it through repression. So there's a lot of trauma in Zimbabwe as a result of just people being brutally oppressed for a long period of time. But then you ask the question, right? You have this global leader in America which says, we stand for freedom, we stand for democracy, we want to promote these values around the world, and it's not happening. So when you start paying close attention, you'll see that it's the failure of the global leaders as well, which is contributing to this unrest. Because in the middle of a pandemic, you then get an additional pressure on everybody. Because now it's not just hard, it's harder than it's ever been. And you're not likely to get your vaccine anytime soon. And there's no economic support from your government because these guys are stealing the money. So that's where you start to see this unrest manifesting more and more. Even in Mozambique, there was this terror activity found fertile ground because the gas reserves were found in northern Mozambique and they wanted to exploit the gas reserves. But the youth of the area, Cabo Delgado, that's the name of the area, they weren't included because they don't have skills. They don't have anything to offer the gas exploration teams. So you have these French companies coming in to do the discovery. You've got the South African guys coming in to do the gas discovery and exploitation. And everyone in the area is like, well, I thought this was our gas. So you mean to tell me all of these guys are going to come in, take the gas, give a cut to the president, and we're going to be left out from our... So these are the things that feed terrorism, because people just think that extremists just come there and say, hey, you're going to get virgins. And then everyone is like, oh yeah, let's go for it. I want some virgins in heaven. Part of it is just that they are frustrated by the socioeconomic environment. And these guys offer them food, they offer them support for their real needs, and then also tell them that they need to fight this just war. And this is how these things happen. So the extremism that is unfolding in different parts of the world is driven by this inequality. Now, I'm not a socialist, right? But I am a social capitalist, because I recognize that capitalism has to put some money back into the system to keep the system going. If everyone just keeps withdrawing and nobody takes care of the baseline fabric, the thing tears, and it tears in different ways that are unjust and ways that make things worse for everybody.
100%. So last question. How can we right the ship? What are some areas that, whether that's, gun ownership for, I wouldn't want a person that's extremely fearful to have a gun and I don't have a gun. So I do think all of the youth and everyone, because I think a lot of times things gets down to violence. Violence changes people, or the ability to defend yourself from unjust activities with the threat or potential use of violence changes things. But it may not be just gun in this scenario, right? From your perspective, what are some areas or things that we can do in the global community, as well as South Africans themselves, to kind of right the ship in the direction and course correct a bit?
Well, look, I think it's from the South African internal perspective, I think all that can be done is being done, right? People are challenging the army, saying, listen, don't overreact when you get onto the ground. People have been trying to protect the retail outlets, make sure the looting doesn't get out of hand. So it's a very politically active space. But I think one of the things that can be done is this external pressure that needs to be put on, and the external gaze, like what you're doing. It's one of the ways to do it, to approach, Congress people are so approachable in America. It's almost a joke, because politicians in Africa are so distant from the people. But if there's ways to get these people to start putting this on the radar, I've not read. I heard the squad talking about South Africa. I've not heard the squad talking about Eswatini. I've not
Mm,
heard anybody putting Zimbabwe on the radar in recent times from the young and energetic and social media savvy, Congress people who I would have thought would. I haven't
mm,
heard a lot of senators talk about this kind of stuff. And America's a global leader on democracy, on values, right? And this is how China ends up winning
yeah.
because, like, you got all the good guys sitting on the fence pontificating instead of actually getting skin in the game.
Mm,
So from that level, I would say those things could be useful, putting this on the radar in a good way in America, trying to get action.
yeah.
I don't know what we can do to help the youth of Eswatini, of South Africa, who are just totally out of the system, right? Because that's a harder problem. And I know you are a solutionary, always looking for ways to help. But I think perhaps trying to apply some pressure so that this can get onto the policy radar in a way that is well informed in America can help. Because
Mm,
then these guys know that they're not going to just get away with murder. People are watching, the global community is watching. And I think the African diaspora, like, one thing I get peeved by is because there's so much African Americans can do with the African diaspora, but sometimes I know ADOS is fighting with the diaspora, and then it gets messy because people don't see the common vision. And
mm,
what I want to say to everyone is, for every African American trying to make a $10 from a dollar, it's easier to make that $10 if you invest it in Africa than if
mm,
you try to reinvest it in Silicon Valley or in Bitcoin or anything like that. Not to say that those things are not like interesting ideas, but Jay-Z would have been a billionaire way sooner if he had actually taken African investment seriously, just because the baseline is low, right?
mm,
And the competition
mm,
is low. So
mm,
so there's things that can be done. And I would actually challenge you as well, Mash, to say, how can we bring solutionaries, whether they're African diaspora in America and even in the UK, and African Americans who say, I get the global picture, I get the global dynamics. What can we do to get Africa in a better position? Because guess what? Here's the thing about your particular position. No matter what you guys do, there's such an unwelcome vibe for black men and women in America. Every time I look, no matter what happens, even Jay-Z is still dealing with issues. If they won't
mm,
even let that man into the club, what
mm,
what chance do the other 40 million Black Americans have? There has to be a conversation about how do we actually start extracting value from America to build Africa, so that we can start getting the same level of respect everyone else gets on the global stage. If you
mm,
don't build your home base, there's always a certain level of disrespect which will exist, because people will be like, you don't have anywhere to go.
mm,
You stuck here, and we're
yeah.
going to treat you any way that we want because you can't go nowhere. But
Mm,
that US dollar, that $1 can go so far in Africa. Why aren't people putting it together? Why isn't the African American community with the African diaspora community challenging all of these young Congress people to put stuff on the radar,
mm,
right? Because they put Palestine on the radar, and there's nothing wrong with that. But
mm,
why are we not putting Eswatini on the radar? Why are we not putting Zimbabwe on the radar? Why are we not putting all of these things on the radar? And some of those countries may need armed revolution, right?
mm,
But I can't advocate for that because I have to be a peaceful African. I'm here on the ground, but I'm just saying it's food for thought,
yeah.
right? Because some countries have had oppressive dictatorships for so long that maybe that's what the youth they need, and it's
Mm,
worth thinking about.
yeah.
So for those who are gun advocates, that's food for your thought there. But I'm advocating for a peaceful position. You know my position on this stuff. But I'm
Yeah.
just saying,
Yeah.
I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
So that would be my invocation, basically, in terms of how do we solve some of this stuff in a real way. I mean, how do we get some of these young, like, who's this guy who just became a senator from Atlanta? Why can't we get him to speak on this?
Mm. I think I
Do you know what I
think that
mean?
I think that what you're saying is not only challenging, but I think a lot of people are afraid. I think that even with the money that we've raised and given away over the few years to do the work that we're doing with Black Guns Matter, I've noticed even more so my famous celebrity friends. I'm like, bro, you're afraid to actually say that you're a gun owner in America. You know, so these and even having this conversation about saying, you know, I bump heads with some of my conservative brothers and sisters. And, you know, when I'm talking about, yo, why aren't we having the conversation about reparations in America? Now, some people go, well, I mean, America, who's going to pay for it? Blah, blah, blah. You just printed up trillions of dollars out of thin air. So, and I'm not saying I know the exact answer to reparations, but to even have the conversation about it, some people become afraid because you're targeted as a so-called race baiter or whatever terminology. But at the same time, the contradiction is we say we're about accountability. Well, the MAFA, the transatlantic slave trade, was one of the most horrific atrocities that ever happened in history. So if there's no
Germany paid reparations to the Jewish community after the Holocaust. And it was a new government. It wasn't a Nazi government, but they recognized that the atrocity that had been committed needed to be rectified, not only through verbal apology, not only through imprisonment and some people getting a death sentence, it also had to be addressed financially to almost try to make people whole. You know, and that's important. So I see the conversation about reparations, and you know, there's a lot of disingenuous stuff that happens in the American discourse. And to be honest, I mean, the wealthiest nation in the world, whether you're capitalist or socialist, you guys should have universal health care. You guys should have some of these basic things like maternity leave for pregnant women. I mean, it's ridiculous, the stuff that isn't in America. Like, women are still fighting to this day for equal pay. That stuff is codified even in African countries. You know, like even
you know, it's funny that you say that because, you know, I've been to Ghana, Senegal, and Egypt. So I named the city in the 2 states, but nonetheless, the things that I've noticed, it's like backwards world. It's like the level of and I've been, when I was in Egypt, I was 19 at the time. The level of happiness that some have with less, and the level of frustration that some in America or other parts of the globe have with, you know, economically more, it's always backwards to me. And so even this concept of me saying, you know, hey, everyone that donated to our GoFundMe was performing a form of voluntarism that we use as a social benefit. Hey, I have some extra money. I'm going to donate $50. I'm going to help somebody get some information about something that we all could benefit from. I think that's important. I think the scary thing for a lot of people is if they don't have a full understanding that a mixed economy is good and free market capitalism is good in regards to, hey, I want to provide and I don't want somebody else transferring my wealth for me, but I want to be culturally sensitive and aware and morally upright enough to at least attempt to help people to stand on their own, not to be a complete crutch, but hey, this person, I have a little bit more, let me help a little bit. I think what happens there is people get afraid and go, oh, I'm not a socialist. Oh, I'm not a communist. Exactly. When in reality, you give, or taxes are taken from you that pay police forces, you know, that's a redistribution of your wealth. They have a monopoly in that regard. So I think the lack of understanding of what these concepts are and the fear of being appearing as if you're advocating for the state to own means of production or the transferring of wealth. I think both of those things are there. That's why I thought this conversation was very important, because not only do we want people to know what's going on in South Africa, as many times as people say, whether they're romanticizing Africa, South Africa, romanticizing some of the leaders from these great nations, whether that's Nasser or Lumumba or Nkrumah, whoever, right? I think what happens is, okay, now, like, to use your phrase, to have some skin in the game, let's find out exactly what's going on there and figure out a way that we can create investment, help others, and help ourselves at the same time. But I think the Second Amendment community becomes a little bit nervous about that, because they hear that phrase, they hear those ideas, and they think it's going to automatically make you an overnight communist and things like that. And I disagree with that. That's why I thought it was very important to have this conversation and showcase, like, hey, this is what's happening. This is what's been happening. Here's a way that we can help if you choose to. But don't say all of this like, we got to live these ideals. You can't have a conversation with me about the American flag, or people not standing for a flag, if we're not standing up to the ideals that we say we are actually trying to espouse. And I think being critical of ourselves in that regard isn't a negative. I think that it actually, if we have a real genuine conversation and look at internally, look at self, I think we can start to make direction, at least the people that actually want to develop a legitimate position that is in alignment with what we're saying we're about, you know. And that's not a knock to as if the people of South Africa absolutely are dependent on America. That's not a knock to, oh, America's a horribly awful place because we haven't done it yet. But I think bringing up those points of why isn't AOC bringing these things up is politically advantageous, and they cherry pick which scenarios and in countries that they want to have this conversation about. But the contradiction is very, very clear to me, and that's at least the way that I kind of look at it, you know. So.
No, I think those are fair points, man. Thanks so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Rest up, be easy. I don't know when y'all, man, whenever you come back, you know, come to America, man, we got to kick it. And I want to come to South Africa. I got a friend of mine that does business there pretty often.
Yeah.
I'm not taking a COVID shot. I'm not taking none of that shit. I'm just not doing it. But when I really want to link, man, and I want to stay in touch with you, and any way that you come up with ideas that I can assist. You got me. You know, I'm gonna text you my message you my info right now. But I really appreciate you sharing perspective, my brother.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, Major. And you're more than welcome. I'll give you a tour when you hit the ground. But I'll hit you up, man, and then we'll chat further. You know, I like the concept of being a solutionary. And you've actually, from our last conversation on just guns specifically, you know, we spoke about that whole gun conversation. Yeah. I've shifted my views on it somewhat, you know, and I think that's the value of discourse. And sometimes people aren't willing or able to take the time to listen and actually reflect because they're scared of the labels, you know, because they're like, oh, no, guns means this particular political ideology or whatever, you know. But you know, you said to me, and I said to someone else recently when the issue came up, I said, look, you know, if something goes down here, I'm not going to be able to debate criminals, you know. I need to have different means to protect the family, the household. And you brought that up, you know. And even though I'm a peace-loving person, I appreciate that peace requires work sometimes. Yeah. And even though, and I appreciate the discomfort that should exist. I don't think anybody should just willingly be able or, you know, ready to jump and say, just give me a gun. I want to shoot something. I want to shoot someone, because that's a reckless person. So even in that conversation, I've appreciated your contributions, and I've also thought, you know, where could armed revolution actually be necessary? Because if you have a dictator for 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, at what point are the youth not justified to take other means? Because democracy is not working for them, because the systems are rigged, the politicians are corrupt, and that's not a case in South Africa. South Africa is still a vibrant democracy, but in other parts of Africa, what must the youth do? And you know, I thought about it in that context as well, and I was like, well, I can't say I'm opposed to gun ownership and usage, even in spaces where people still have to complete their own revolutions, so to speak. So I really appreciate the conversations, man. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you, my brother. I will talk to you soon.
Pleasure.
Rest up. Be safe out there, man.
Thanks so much. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Peace.